there are mothers throughout this congregation who every single day are on their knees with tears praying for their children who have not received Christ because they know what lies at the end of this life. There is appointed to each man once to die, Hebrews says, and after this, they go. And they cry out to the Lord to move heaven and earth and move every mountain to draw that child to the throne of grace. They don't care if they change. They don't care if they act differently. They don't care about anything except the salvation of the ones they love. And they are on their knees every moment of their life. That's the heartbeat of Christ. Operating in the hearts of our mother. Paul goes on as he writes that speak with the tongues of men and of angels and have not charity, have not love. I am as a sounding brass and a tinkling cymbal. And when he says that, he says, whatever I am, if I don't have love, love's lack cheapens anything I do and whatever I say. It has no meaning. In verse 2, he says this, and though I have the gift of prophecy and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and though I have all faith, sounds like a great resume. And so that I could remove mountains and have not love, he says, I am nothing. He says, whatever I know, whatever I think of myself. Ooh, my voice went up there. Isn't that cool? Whatever I think of myself, how rich my resume of my knowledge and my faith is, if I don't have love, my lack of love negates all that. It's worthless. He says in verse 3, and though I bestow all my goods to feed the poor, and though I give my body to be burned, and have not love, it profiteth me nothing. He says, whatever I do, whether I give everything I have away, whether I am the most philanthropic person on the planet, if I give my body to research, whatever I do, if I give everything away and I don't do it out of love, that lack of love disempowers everything, and it will not cause a single heart to change for the better. And then Paul gives us 6 sets of characteristics of love. I bet you've never seen that before. There are 6 sets, and they complement each other as we walk through. Let me walk you through this. I wish I could spend more time on each one of them, but I want to drive to the end as quickly as I can. The first set is found in the first part of verse 4. 2 items. He says this, charity, love suffers long and is kind. Those 2 things walk hand in hand together. He says, love suffers long and is kind. And boy, I'd like to go into a lot of details on this, but it just means this. Mild, a person who exhibits the love of Christ remains mild and kind in the face, watch this, of burning long. What do I mean by that? To suffer long, we've talked about that Greek word before. I'm not even going to tell you. Whoop, see what I did? That suffering long is a word. I'm not going to tell you what it is because I'm not going to do Greek today. That word talks about the fact that we are called not to be angered by the first spark of flame at our feet. Not to be angered when things just start to go wrong. We need to be long-suffering. We need to be long-burning. We need to not react to everything that happens, but anger needs to be held, to be godly anger. When things get so out of control, things must be dealt with. How patient are we with circumstances that go awry? How patient are we? Are we long-suffering? And in the face of that long-suffering, in the face of that burning at our feet or anywhere else in your body that you want to give to, in face of the trials that you go through, do you remain kind during that time? Paul says, Christ says through Paul, love is long-suffering and kind. Then the next set is this. It's the second half of that same verse, verse 4. It says, love envies not, vaunts not itself, and is not puffed up. You ever lose your train of thought because you can't see the words? Love envies not, vaunts not, puffs not. And the idea behind that is simply this. You put all those three together, and it says, if you exemplify the love of Christ, you are content in your circumstances. You do not boast for your own glory. You do not vaunt yourself up and make yourself look good. And you do not take satisfaction in inflating yourself. Too many of us men are political animals. We want people to see all our good things and ignore all our bad things. We want people to see us and tell us how wonderful we are. We do have, ladies and gentlemen, I know this isn't in the Bible, and it's kind of modern psychology, but we do have what's called a male ego. And sometimes that male ego needs to get knocked down and not vaunted up. But I tell you what, love, it says, envies not, does not want something that is not theirs, vaunts not itself, doesn't lift ourselves up in other people's eyes, is not puffed up, does not think too much of itself, is content within who we are. The third set is in the first part of verse 5, and it has one single thing in its set, all by itself. Paul says, love does not behave itself unseemly. And when you look at that, when you look at the words, when you look at the original language, it's talking about this. Love does not take actions designed to draw attention to ourselves. Love does not do things which are designed for one purpose only, and it's to get everyone else to look at us and say, look at that. Look at that person. Aren't they wonderful? Love does not act unseemly. And we move on to the next set. And you look in the second half of verse 5, it says this, love seeketh not her own, is not easily provoked, thinketh no evil. Before we look at those items, I want to ask you a question. Whenever you've read this scripture before, and whenever you read this particular word, the agape word, throughout the New Testament, you're going to find something really interesting. And I don't know if I want to read too much into this, but I want to tell you what you always will find. It will always be connected to a feminine pronoun. Love will never be defined as a him or an it. It will always be defined as a her. Why do you think that is? You don't know? I think it's this. I think it's so simple. I think it's not something that the Greeks, when their language was evolving, really thought too much about. It just was obvious to them that the personification of love, the personification of tenderness, the personification of compassion and self-sacrifice resides mostly within the women in our lives. We have to struggle at it. Most of them seem to do it pretty easily. Or if not, it seems to us to be pretty easy. Love is a her. And when we look at this next set, where were we? Verse 5? Love seeketh not her own, is not easily provoked, and thinketh no evil. It seeks first not her own. It seeks for others. It reacts not. The way I notate this in my heart, it seeketh not her own, is not easily provoked. It reacts not to the swift kick. Gentlemen, if someone comes up to you, you don't know, comes up behind you and kicks you in the derriere, what is your reaction? What do? You turn around and you're ready to fight, aren't you? You turn around, you're ready to grab them, slam them against the wall, ask them what they're thinking. You assume that there's something nefarious about why they're doing this to you. God says, love is not easily provoked, and love thinketh no evil. If you exhibit the love of Christ, you don't immediately begin thinking about bad motivations within the person you're speaking to or the person who's acting out. When you're driving on the highway, here it comes again, the highway thing. Y'all laugh at me when I do this. I really don't have that much of a problem on the highway anymore, but it used to be a real problem for me, guys. When you're driving on the highway and someone drives dangerously, cutting back and forth, driving 100 miles an hour, cutting in front of you this far from your bumper, zipping up ahead of the highway, what are you thinking? What a what? What a what? What a what? Who wants to use the word? Right? You're thinking, oh, guys, all sorts of bad things. Up till about 15, 16 years ago, that was me. Bad drivers should be all shot. Until one day I was driving on the 408, and some guy did that to me, and I just got angry like I always do. And it's almost like God just grabbed my ear and said, maybe he's on the way to the hospital because his little girl got in an accident. And I go, oh, didn't think about that. Does not assume bad motivations on the part of others. It's a problem in churches, not ours, of course, but the problem in churches is that when someone says something or does something that offends another person, we automatically assume what they're thinking and why they're doing it, rather than just going to finding out what they think. And most of the time, they didn't even know they were doing anything offensive. They need to be brought to a point where they can see the problem and deal with the problem, but nonetheless, motivations aren't ours to assign. Right? I'm glad they're not, because, boy, I have nothing but love for all of you. But you probably don't know that by the way I act, do you? Set 5, verse 6. Love rejoices not in iniquity, but rejoices in the truth. When it talks about iniquity, the word iniquity here is different than the words used elsewhere in the New Testament. It basically means this: love does not rejoice in injustice. The idea being, even if that injustice brings us something we want, love does not rejoice in injustice, but it is unified. Sigkado, there it is, a Greek word. It is unified in its walk with truth and truth's triumph. But here's the verse I want to spend some time with, and here's the verse we're going to camp in as we wrap up this sermon. And y'all know when I say we're about to wrap up the sermon, that doesn't mean we're going to be done in 5 minutes. Power. Verse 7. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Now, anytime you see something poetic and very staccato like that, you have to look at what ties them together. And what's the word that ties all four of those statements together? It's the word all. It's the Greek word pas. And anytime you use the word pas in this derivation, it means everything. All things, all times, all circumstances. And the idea is this: for a person to bear all things, and the other three it talks about, it's something we have to actively choose to do by faith. Bears all things. I love this word. Oh, come on. Greek word you get. It's the Greek word stego. And stego refers, this verse, I believe with all my heart, I believe when Paul was writing this, he was thinking of this verse back in Proverbs 17. Up with a bunch of junk. Wronged me over and over and over and over and over again. How many times should I forgive him? 7? Lord, 70 times 7. It's kind of interesting that he said that, because how many is that? 490, right? 70 Sabbaths. That's interesting. How long was it after Israel came into the land and God looked at them and he said, now that you're in the promised land, every 7 years you let your ground go fallow. It's a year of rest for this land. It's important, because if you don't do it, I will hold you accountable to it. Right? How many years Sabbath, 7th year Sabbath, does Israel miss? 70. 70 times 7 for 490 years, they failed fail to follow God's command. And you know what happened on year 491 from the day that Joshua walked into that land? Nebuchadnezzar came and took them out. Peter says 7. Christ says 70 times 7. Believeth all things, hopeth all things, hopeth all things. What does hope mean? It means to wait with confidence for what has been promised to happen. Mamas, how long have you been on your knees for that kid that will not surrender? For that grandchild? For that husband even? How long have you been on your knees? Did God say he hears your prayers? Did God say he's going to answer your prayers? Do your prayers make God work harder at what he's doing? Here's my answer to that. I don't know how, I don't know why, but the Bible says yes. The efficacy of his work in the life of those you're praying for increases when you are faithful to that prayer. Mamas, you ever give up praying for that child? Why? You've been praying for 50 years. Oh, for crying out loud. Why don't you just give up? Never going to happen. You know how radical and you know how wrong-headed that kid is? Why are you never giving up? Because you're hoping. You're hoping. Are you just hoping there's something? No. You're hoping in the hand of God in the heart of a child. I don't care how old that child gets, you're hoping for the hand of God. And you know, by your faith, you know that the moment you started praying, and probably before then, his hand was already working, and it hasn't stopped working since then. So if that child is ever going to surrender, it's God who's going to get him to surrender. Hopeth all things. Endureth all things. Hupomeno means simply this: to remain in the place that you are. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Someone would ask me, who are the 4 greatest women in the history of Israel in the Old Testament? That's a hard one to come up with. But I have 4 that I love dearly. It's interesting that I have 4 great women that I love, but when you ask me who are my favorite Old Testament men, I can really only come up with 1. But that's not for today. But when I look at women in the Old Testament, I have such great respect, although none of them were absolutely perfect, for 4 women, for Sarai, later Sarah,